All right, today I'm going to tell you about one obscure cryptid from every U.S. state. So let's kick things off with...
Alabama, the Mobile Wolf Woman.
Okay, this is a fantastic one to start with. On April 8th of 1971, the Mobile, Alabama Register reported that over the last week, dozens of Mobile residents had called into the paper claiming to have seen a half-woman, half-wolf. It was like a woman and wolf, pretty and hairy, said one worried witness. My daddy saw it down in a marsh and it chased him home, said another. Even typically unflappable teenagers were staying home at night, terrified of the horrible beast. And what exactly did that beast look like? Well, this, of course. Yeah, that there is the Mobile Register's attempt to recreate what the wolf woman might have looked like. Pretty and hairy indeed. Despite the apparent earnesty of the original calls, though, the wolf woman story very quickly became a bit of a punchline around Mobile. See, most sightings were really just second-hand reports from a friend of a friend, and so over time, people just quit taking the wolf woman seriously, to a point where local theaters were even using the monster as a promotional tool. Like, just take a look at this ad I found. You've heard the hoax about the wolf woman, right? Well, come watch our movie about a real monster. Bigfoot. I also found a story saying that one drunken resident had called into the police station thinking that he had finally cornered the wolf woman. And then when the cops arrived, all they found was one very frightened collie dog. As funny as all that is, though, my favorite detail actually comes from a letter that the Mobile Press printed a couple weeks after the sightings first started to pop up. Apparently, someone had cut an article about the wolf woman out of the local paper and then sent it to a soldier from Alabama who was stationed in Vietnam. And the soldier wrote back saying, when you capture the wolf woman, why don't you send her out here to Hanoi? Maybe she can help find all the POWs and MIAs. And you know, as far as I can tell, the wolf woman sightings actually stopped right around the same time that that letter was printed. So maybe she went.
Alaska, the Cellophane Ghost.
In August of 1975, 15 children in Fairbanks, Alaska reported seeing a 7-foot-tall, pure white humanoid figure that had no hair, no joints in its limbs, and no facial features besides 2 perfectly circular eyes and a pair of pointy ears on the top of its head. No adult ever saw this creature, but the kids were supposedly seeing it constantly. Like they'd spot him up in trees and on rooftops, and sometimes even floating 5 feet above the local river like it was dead in the air. One kid even drew a picture of what the man supposedly looked like, and here is that picture. I don't blame the kids for being scared of that. Just imagine that thing hovering in the air and floating across the river at you. As you might guess, though, most adults in the area thought that the whole thing was just some big prank, and one journalist even noted that he actually heard muffled laughter in the background of a phone call that he took about the sightings. So I guess the kids were going, "Oh yeah, Mr. Reporter, that monster definitely floated across the river at us. I'm gonna tell him he has no kneecaps. And the monster had no kneecaps." Anyway, though, I only found one single newspaper article about this monster, and as far as I can tell, nobody ever printed anything about it ever again after 1975. So I guess the story just fizzled out pretty much as soon as it got started. And by the way, real quick, before we move on to the next cryptid, I did want to draw attention to the name of this monster, the Cellophane Ghost. You might have noticed that nobody in the newspaper article ever referred to the monster that way, and that is because I made up that name. See, a lot of the cryptids that we're going to be talking about today are so obscure that nobody even bothered to come up with a name for them. And so the honor fell upon me to come up with titles for some of these cryptids. The name of this particular beast from Alaska I based on a quote from the newspaper article, because apparently one of the local kids didn't believe in the monster and said that it was in reality just a blue plastic bag flying around in the wind. And so I juggled around a few names like Plastic Jack or the Alaskan Bag Man before I finally settled on the Cellophane Ghost, which has a nice ring to it, I think.
Arizona, the Main Street Phenom.
Pretty bland name on this one, but the newspapers back in 1894 did refer to this thing pretty consistently as the Main Street Ghost or Main Street Phenomenon. So who am I to upset tradition? Here's the story. Way back in September of 1894, a man was walking home late at night through Tucson, Arizona, when a peculiar animal rushed out at him. And the man kicked at the beast, and he hit nothing but air, and he watched as the monster seemed to disappear right before his eyes. As the man continued his walk home, the animal repeatedly appeared and disappeared in front of him, just blinking in and out of sight, until finally the poor guy made it back to his house, absolutely terrified. Strangely though, despite seeing the monster many times during the course of his walk home, the man could hardly describe it. All he could remember was its great glowing eyeballs piercing through the night. Soon after that horrible experience, many other residents of Tucson began to report encounters with the beast. Over the next few days, at least 20 people saw the animal, and each time it seemed to take an entirely different shape. Sometimes it looked like a dog, and sometimes a donkey, and sometimes even a man walking around on all fours. Before long, a search party was put together. A whole crowd of townsfolk walked into the night armed with pistols and knives and clubs, all ready to flush out the monster that was terrorizing their town. And wouldn't you know it, the monster actually appeared. The Main Street Ghost rose right out of the ground directly in front of the crowd. Just whoop. So immediately the crowd started shooting at the beast, and one man tried to stab it with a knife, but alas, the monster remained uninjured. All the bullets and blades seemed to pass right through it. So the crowd ran away. They had lost the battle, and they got the heck out of there. Fast forward a few days, and now over 100 Mexicans are running around downtown Tucson, desperately trying to find the ghost. By now, the monster had the city in an absolute whirlwind. Like every night, people were encountering the monster, and horses were throwing off their riders as the ghost materialized in front of them, and police were emptying pistols at the monster and hitting nothing but air, like clearly this thing was here to stay. Until it was discovered about a month later that the ghost was actually 5 people running around at night wearing pillowcases on their heads. Yeah, this is our first cryptid story that actually has a definite resolution. The Main Street Phenom of Tucson, Arizona, in reality, was a few people running around at night trying to scare the local townsfolk. And the reason they did this is so that their friends could go out and rob people's houses under cover of a ghostly distraction. The newspapers never actually specified how the ghost fakers were caught, but apparently the entire thing was just a scheme to get people out of their homes and distracted so that the burglar crew could sneak in and steal stuff. And I'd say their plan actually worked pretty well, considering that they successfully coaxed hundreds of people into running around at night trying to catch the ghost. Ultimately, though, they did get caught, and the Main Street ghost was finally put to bed for good in March of 1895 when the ringleader was tried and convicted of grand larceny. So don't get any funny ideas.
Arkansas, the Bull Roarer.
This is another monster that I'm pretty sure made exactly one appearance in all of printed history. The narrators for this story are a group of Illinois pleasure seekers who drove down to Arkansas in 1908 after hearing about a cave near Mammoth Springs that was still mostly unexplored. Composing the group were two couples from Illinois, a woman from Indiana, and a local guide from Arkansas. And at first, the group had a great time. They entered the cave and they walked across a natural bridge made of stone, and they passed through a very wide tunnel deep underground, and eventually they came to a subterranean lake that blocked their forward progress. Luckily for them though, somebody had actually left a bunch of wooden planks at the entrance to the cave, so the group built a raft and they sent two men from the party out onto the lake. A slight current in the water dragged the raft about 500 feet downstream through some twists and turns until, all of a sudden, a roaring howl echoed through the cave. There, right in front of the raft, illuminated by the soft glow of the men's lamp, was a beast. An immense creature rising out of the water, bigger than a bull, with flippers like a seal, and the head of a horse with no ears. Immediately, the monster charged at the raft, flashing its long pointed teeth, so bang! One of the men fired off a shotgun that he had brought into the cave, and then he fired again right after, and the monster, seemingly wounded by the blasts, began to thrash around in the tunnel, howling in pain, before it turned and disappeared into an opening in the wall of the cave. Of course, the men rowed back up the river as quick as they could. They met up with the rest of the group who had heard the horrible bellowing and shotgun blasts rumbling around through the cave, and the whole group made their way back up to the surface, accompanied the entire time by the echoing shrieks of the monster lurking deep below. And that is the whole story. The bull roarer lives in this one newspaper article from 1908 and nowhere else. That's another name that I came up with, by the way. I'm pretty proud of that one, bull roarer. I did kind of steal it from Lord of the Rings, though, if I'm being honest.
California, the San Gabriel Ophidian.
All right, so back in 1906, the Sierra Madre Mountains of California experienced an unusually large amount of earthquakes, which opened up a whole bunch of fissures across the mountain range. And as they opened up those fissures, they also released a long-forgotten flying subterranean monster into the waters of the San Gabriel River. At least according to this newspaper article from November of 1906. If you read the story here, you'll learn about a giant slimy snake with 20-foot wings that multiple people reported seeing as it flew and swam up and down the San Gabriel River. But if you ask me, the most interesting part of this story is not the sightings, but instead that idea that the monster was released from underground by all the earthquakes. Proponents of that theory like to point out a few of the snake's physical features as evidence. Like, for example, the monster was grayish-white in color, which is common in subterranean creatures, and the monster also seemed to be blind, which makes sense because if you live deep underground, you don't need eyes, right? And you might have already noticed the problem with this theory, and that is the fact that the monster had wings. Like, it had 20-foot wings, and they thought it came from underwater caves. Like somehow the monster was blind from growing up in caverns filled with water, but then simultaneously it also developed wings for no reason. Like, I know I'm criticizing I'm criticizing a 120-year-old theory about a monster that nobody's ever heard of today, but like still, come on, how can you let that slip by? It's so obvious.
Colorado, the Wazooey Man.
This one just really makes me laugh. The earliest source for this monster that I could find is Jim Brandon's Weird America, published back in 1978. And I couldn't find any newspaper articles about this cryptid or any other appearances in any other books. So I can only assume that Mr. Brandon must have collected this story personally from some resident of Colorado. As the story goes, two boys one evening in 1973 were shooting air pistols on a backcountry road near Pueblo, Colorado, when all of a sudden a couple of huge red eyes appeared before them, and one of the boys raised up his pistol and took a shot at the eyes, and then the monster picked them up and dumped them into a ditch and then hit them over the head with a fence post. Just So the horrified boys ran back to their truck only to discover that they had lost their keys, so they started walking home and trying to hitchhike, and apparently the whole way they were followed by a great big monster that looked like a haystack with glowing red eyes.
Connecticut, the North Haven Ghost Dwarf.
This one comes from an article published in the Boston Daily Globe back in 1886. One night in January of that year, a few brickyard workers were walking home down an old country road when suddenly, there in front of them stood a man about 3 feet tall, a mysterious-looking dwarf alone in the darkness. Now, the leader of the workers was a big, tough Irish guy named Owen McNulty, and McNulty took one look at that little man in the road, took a shovel off his shoulder, and shouted, "Boys, I guess I'll scoop this chap." Then he ran up to the dwarf and swung a mighty swing, and his shovel passed right through the figure like there was nothing even there. And that scared McNulty and the gang pretty bad, so they ran down the road ready to tell everybody about the ghost dwarf that they had just encountered. But evidently, curiosity must have got the better of fear, because when the next night rolled around, McNulty and the gang were back on the road again, determined to catch another glimpse of that mysterious magical dwarf. And wouldn't you know it, they found him once again. There he was, standing in the road, that very same little dwarf. And Owen McNulty again immediately grabbed his shovel, ran up to the dwarf, swung for the fences, and tried to knock its head off. But again, no luck. The shovel seemed to pass right through the ghostly figure. And then the dwarf split in half, and it floated way up into the night sky, and it evaporated into thin air. Gone in an instant. I really, really love this story because it's written as if you're supposed to be shocked and scared, that little ghost dwarf. But to me, I am 10 million times more afraid of Owen McNulty, because that guy saw a small man on the road and instantly decided to decapitate it. Like, that dwarf did nothing, it didn't say anything or do anything or hurt anybody, and Owen just yelled, "I guess I'll scoop this chap," and then tried to bash its face in with a shovel. Like, what if that was a child or just like a short, regular guy? Like, if you ask me, the real cryptid here is the insane roadside shovel murderer and not the harmless little dwarf guy that did nothing to nobody.
Delaware, the Devil in Black.
In April of 1909, in Georgetown, Delaware, a really tall guy dressed in a black cloak kept jumping out from behind trees and scaring women. And that is pretty much the whole story. Like one time he jumped out at a lady and she ran screaming into her house, and another time he chased a girl into a grocery store, and once he popped out of a shed and scared a woman in her yard. And honestly, the only reason that I'm even counting this as a cryptid is because a couple of newspapers reported that the guy might be bulletproof. If it wasn't for that small little tinge of supernatural flavor, then this would kinda just be a tall, creepy guy.
Florida, the Grim Grouper.
The Grim Grouper, as I've named it, was a giant fish that was captured in May of 1934 by a lighthouse keeper who was stationed just a few miles off the coast of Miami. The fish was 8.5 feet long, and it weighed 275 pounds, and it had the head of an alligator with tiny little yellow eyes, and the beast had 3 rows of sharp teeth, and it was colored green and brown and white, and it had green stripes on its head, and it smelled like a grouper and not like a shark, which is where I got the name. And I guess its tummy was really smooth. And none of that really sounds all that exciting, right? Like, I'm listing off all these traits that are sort of strange, but in the grand scheme of things, this is pretty much just a weird fish. Like, as far as cryptids go, it's fairly bland. So why did I choose this fish to represent Florida if it's kind of boring? Well, it's because the sole newspaper article that I found concerning this monster includes a quote that I just really want to show you. That the fish was of a savage nature was indicated by the several attempts made to bite the line with which it was being raised to the platform of the light, where it expired about 10 minutes later. So in essence, that quote is like, we were only trying to string it up and torture it to death, and it tried to bite the line and escape and not die, so of course it was savage.
Georgia, the Chickamauga megafrogs.
Here's one that I found in a sporting goods magazine from 1893. According to this article, someone in 1866 brought a whole bunch of frogs from the swamps of Mississippi and dumped them into the Chickamauga River in Georgia. And then fast forward a couple decades, and now the frogs are gigantic and vicious. They are big enough to swallow chickens and mean enough to attack full-grown men. Like one guy, for example, in Lafayette, Georgia, said that a frog jumped up and grabbed the end of his coat and just ripped the coat in half, just right off the guy's back. I'm going to be honest though, the main reason that I chose this one was because I wanted to say Chickamauga megafrogs.
Hawaii, the phantom dog of Mauna Loa.
Okay, so I'm sure by now you can tell that I'm really not interested in cryptids because I believe in them, but instead because I think they're just super fun to read and learn about as like social and cultural phenomena. And at the end of the day, I also just really like a good story. This next one though is a little bit different from all the rest because I truly believe that something is going on here, to a point where I'm honestly a little bit shocked that this story isn't more well known. So, between 1959 and 1966, researchers at a weather observatory in Hawaii would occasionally spot a 10 to 15 pound dog jumping around near their station, which doesn't seem that strange until you learn that the observatory is 11,000 feet above sea level on the side of the Mauna Loa volcano. And from that observatory, it is 23 miles to the nearest inhabited building, and there is no water up there, and no vegetation, no animals, really no anything that might assist a little dog living out in the wild on its own. It is literally just miles and miles of barren rock. it almost seems unbelievable that a dog could survive up there. But somehow, this dog did for years. Like, researchers assumed that the dog must have been eaten out of the observatory's trash, and sometimes they would even leave out dog food, but staffing at the station was super inconsistent, and sometimes the dog would literally disappear from the station for years at a time. So clearly, this dog had to have been finding food and water on its own 23 miles from any obvious food source. Like, despite how impossible that seems, this really happened. And like, occasionally sightings of the dog would also line up with volcanic eruptions, which led some people to believe that the dog was some kind of like herald, like a spiritual warning for upcoming volcanic activity. But the researchers always maintained that they saw the dog way too often for that to be the case. Like, all the time, they would just see it sitting on some rocks, watching them work, always just staying a little bit too far out of reach. And if you don't believe the researchers, they even got a picture. Is that not the best thing you've ever seen? Like, that is a phantom dog from the 1960s on the side of Mauna Loa, curled up in a little gully. Like, this one, no matter how you slice it, is a real, honest-to-goodness mystery.
Idaho, the Soda Springs Serpent.
Okay, so after looking through about 1 billion of these old monster stories, I kind of get the feeling that a lot of newspapers just ran these articles so that they had an excuse to put a big crazy picture in the middle of their paper to try and catch people's eyes. Like, let's take a look at this story from Soda Springs, Idaho, back in July of 1980, and you might see what I mean. A family of 3 was fishing in the Blackfoot Reservoir when they saw a dark lump in the water, and then another lump, and another lump, so they decided to go back to shore. And that's the whole story. They never saw anything else besides those lumps, and granted, the lumps were about 8 feet apart and seemed to be moving as one continuous creature, so I can understand why that might be scary for the family to see, but like, this is the absolute thinnest of monster stories you could ever imagine, and I feel very confident in saying that the only reason that the paper even ran that article is so that they could print a big picture of a sea monster going blah!
Illinois, the monster of Gooseville.
Back in August of 1949, many citizens of Gooseville, Illinois, reported sighting a monster that was shaggy and brown and looked like a bear. And also, it left tracks that looked exactly like bear tracks. I did find one newspaper that said that the monster may have had moose antlers, so I guess you never know, but it sure sounds to me like this one was just a bear. But the reason that I wanted to use this one for Illinois is not because of the monster itself, but because supposedly, the monster generated such a buzz around Gooseville that 100 locals got together, literally 100, and formed a posse that was dead set on capturing the monster. And even though they never caught the beast, what they did succeed in doing is taking this absolutely incredible photo of 100 guys lined up with shotguns trying to flush out the beast. Like, this is something that you would never, ever, ever see today. This is a complete and total relic of the past. Like, I'm sure you've all heard that quote that's like, born too late to explore the world, born too early to explore the universe. Well, how about born too late to go monster hunting with 100 of your neighbors? That's what I'm sad about.
Indiana, the Boonville Catman.
Okay, so this next one is somehow simultaneously very silly and very unnerving, at least for me. Like, there's just something about the physical description of this monster that really freaks me out. So listen to this. Back on November 22nd of 1947, an 8-year-old boy was walking home from the movies through Boonville, Indiana, when all of a sudden he encountered a horrifying beast. So he ran home screaming to his parents, and after he calmed down, he described the monster as a giant black cat with glowing green eyes that walks around on its hind legs with its front paws raised above its head. And supposedly, as it walked, the monster would lean over and like awkwardly shuffle around like a man walking on his knees. And at first, the boy's parents just thought that the kid was seeing things, but then a few days later, the boy's sister reported seeing the exact same thing on Thanksgiving night. And then after that, a group of women, of adult women, claimed to see the Cat Man, and a guy saw it in his backyard, and people started reporting that a wild beast was tearing up their trash. And before long, once again, we had bands of local vigilantes walking around with guns trying to hunt down the Cat Man. They never found anything, and eventually the tale of the Cat Man faded away to history. But like I said, something about the physical description of this one just really gets to me. Like, it's basically a panther shuffling around on its hind legs with its paws in the air, leaned forward, and like something about that is right in the sweet spot between familiar and uncanny to me. Like, I can imagine looking out my kitchen window and seeing that in my yard, and just mentally picturing it already freaks me out.
Iowa, the woman in black.
One of my favorite parts of reading through all these old monster and ghost reports is just how quickly they appear and then disappear. Like, a lot of these stories burn incredibly hot for like a week, and then they just wisp away like nothing even happened. Case in point, Albia, Iowa, 1892. For exactly 1 week, the people of Albia were terrified of stepping outside their homes between 11 and 3 o'clock at night, because those were the hours that the woman in black stalked the streets. An 8-foot-tall woman dressed in black with gigantic arms and hands, who would grab unsuspecting women on the shoulders and then flash an evil grin right in their face. The woman would appear on rooftops and then blink away into nothing, and bullets seemed to pass right through her, and she hated women and chased them at every opportunity. Literally dozens of people reported sightings of this thing, and every day the local paper had new articles, and then just she disappeared completely. After a fury of hysterical articles, the woman in black just completely dropped out of the press with zero resolution, no explanation, just a one-way ticket from complete and total pandemonium to radio silence in a single week in 1892, and for the most part, nobody's ever talked about it since then.
Kansas, the Happy Valley Serpent.
And another thing that I really appreciate about these 19th century monster reports is just how seriously they take all these stories. Like, if you read a newspaper article about a cryptid sighting from pretty much any time past 1960 or so, the article is definitely going to have like a kind of mocking tone to it. Like, oh yeah, this guy says he saw a sea monster, but if we're being honest, he probably just had a little too much to drink out on the boat, right? But then a 19th century reporter will treat things exactly the opposite. They will just straight up print the craziest story you've ever heard with total sincerity. Like, check this out. This is the story of the Happy Valley Serpent from Kansas back in 1887. One night in September, a farmer was riding home to Mulvane, Kansas, when he came across an immense log laying in the road. So the farmer rode a little closer, and he discovered that the log was actually a 40-foot-long snake with a body as big around as a flour barrel. And the snake had its head lifted 8 feet up off the ground, looming over the farmer, and hanging out of its mouth was the back half of a baby cow. And with a quick swallow, the serpent finished its meal and it disappeared into a nearby cornfield, leaving the farmer shocked and appalled at what he had just witnessed.
Kentucky, the Kentucky Dog Eater.
The legend of the Kentucky Dog Eater had a surprisingly long lifespan for a monster that is nowadays mostly forgotten. Starting in at least 1883, locals of the Danville, Kentucky area began reporting that a horrible monster was eating their canine companions. And then they kept talking about the monster until, at minimum, 1902, which is 20 years later. That is an eternity in cryptid sighting years. And this was not just a bunch of people blaming their missing dogs on some unseen monster. Like, it wasn't a farmer going, oh, Rover disappeared last night, must have been the dog eater. Like, no, there were many, many supposed sightings of the beast. Some people thought that the dog eater was a jaguar or American tiger, and others described it as some sort of horrible cross between a panther and a mastiff. And one guy even drew a picture of the terrible monster that he swore he saw. And these sightings were not just glimpses either. Like, I found a ton of very detailed encounters with the dog eater. Once, in 1885, a farmer was hauling hay when he saw some weird monster coming across his field. So he just shouted, "Here comes the dog eater," because of course that's what it was. At the time, the dog eater was so well known, that's all he had to say. And then 12 people chased the creature across the countryside until it ran out of sight. Once, in 1894, a group of 4 people encountered the beast on some train tracks, and then they watched as it bounded up the rails in a series of 20-foot leaps. And in 1893, a couple of raccoon hunters found the dog eater drinking out of a stream, and as soon as they got close, their pack of hunting dogs noticed the monster and huddled together, trembling with fear, instinctively understanding that their natural predator was right in front of them. And that is not even mentioning the many, many gruesome stories of dogs getting attacked that I don't even want to show you because they're just kind of gross and sad. Like, this thing was a huge deal in central Kentucky for a long, long time. And now it is pretty much entirely forgotten. Like, it will always be endlessly fascinating to me how some of these stories just disappeared, while other super localized cryptids like the Jersey Devil or the Mothman became these national figures that pretty much everybody knows. My only real guess is that it's just way more fun to talk about a devil that jumps around on rooftops than it is to talk about a monster that dismembers dogs.
Louisiana, the Feathered Devil.
In December of 1891, a man in New Orleans shot and killed a gigantic bird that many locals proclaimed to be the devil. The monster was as big as a sheep and had 9-foot-long white wings with black feathers at the tip, as well as a pouch in its bill like a pelican's. And that is kind of it. Honestly, the main reason that I wanted to include this one was because of this quote at the end of the article. "Enough feathers were taken from the bird to make a large pillow. They are of excellent quality, white and soft as down." So this may in fact be the only cryptid that was ever made into bedding. How embarrassing.
Maine, the Hallowell Ghost Arm.
This story starts with a mill worker named Eli Wing who, in 1837, had his arm torn clean off his body by the power of a spinning mill wheel. Eli actually survived the accident, and he decided to bury his severed arm in the swamp behind the mill, and then he went on to live a long and fruitful life. And that little arm buried in the swamp got real jealous that it was left behind. So jealous, in fact, that if you dare to speak of it, the arm will punch through the window of whatever building you're in and try to strangle you. So if you were wondering, that is actually why I'm shooting this video outside. There's no windows.
Maryland, the Orange Lake Saw Serpent.
One time in March of 1895, a young man was ice skating on Orange Lake in Newburgh, Maryland, when all of a sudden he turned around and saw a 35-foot-long sea serpent swimming through the ice. The monster had a saw-like dorsal fin that it was using to carve its way through the ice as it chased the skater down. Thankfully, the young man made a break for shore and he escaped to safety before the saw serpent could cleave him in half. I really miss the days when you could just go tell your local reporter anything and they'd actually run it in the paper.
Massachusetts, the Provincetown Black Flash.
Okay, so this guy is probably the most well-known cryptid in the whole video, but he's just got such an awesome story that I'm gonna cheat a little and include him anyway. So for those of you who don't know, the Black Flash was a mysterious hooded figure that cast a long shadow of terror over Provincetown, Massachusetts during the 1930s and 40s. For years, residents of Provincetown would report a giant 7-foot-tall guy dressed in a black hood and cape leaping out from alleyways and screaming at people. He would jump up on windowsills and howl into the window, and some people even claimed that the Black Flash would shoot blue fire out of his mouth at people, and that actually led the local police to conclude that the Black Flash was not just a public nuisance, but also an arsonist. Like, many fires in town during that period were blamed on the Black Flash, and so literally hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property damage was attributed to this cryptid. And people really, really believed it too. Like, children were terrified of being alone, and women were scared to even leave the house, and dozens of men were walking the streets every night hoping to capture the elusive Flash. But it gets even better than that. Every once in a while, the local newspapers in Provincetown would report that somebody actually cornered the Black Flash, that some like farmer or a dog would get him stuck up against a fence, and then boing, the Flash would jump straight up in the air over that 10-foot fence like it was absolutely nothing. And for a final detail, in October of 1939, many children in Provincetown actually dressed up as the Black Flash for Halloween. Everybody loves a good villain.
Michigan, the Carter Snake.
This is another one with unbelievable longevity for a cryptid that is pretty much unheard of nowadays. In 1894, somebody saw a gigantic snake in Carter's Lake, Michigan, and then somebody saw it again in 1901, and again in 1906, and again in 1907, and in 1908 somebody saw it, and in 1909 somebody saw it, and then in 1913 a bunch of people actually got together and started the Carter Snake Association, which was an organization that was devoted to finding the Carter snake. And then eventually the locals actually started holding a Carter Snake Day once a year where everybody would go and look for the snake. And in 1935, people were still seeing it, and they were still talking about it in 1949, and even as late as 2001 and 2006, it would still occasionally appear in the local papers. And now, as far as I can tell, it is nearly extinct. Like, go ahead and do a quick Google search and you'll see that the legend of the Carter snake is pretty much entirely dead. Nobody talks about it anymore. It is gone from the public consciousness pretty much completely. And I think that's kind of sad, because that little snake hung on for so long, and he did it without even being that exciting of a cryptid. Like, this snake cannot fly, can't breathe fire, nothing like that. He is literally just a big snake that people talked about for over a century. Like, this is your lunch pail, everyday, blue-collar, hard-working cryptid through blood, sweat, and tears. He hung around for decades, and now his legend is about to slip away. So I tell you what, if anybody watching this video happens to live in the vicinity of Carter's Lake in Michigan, then why don't you maybe head on over to that lake and see the snake, if you know what I mean. Just try and get yourself some press and extend that reptile's lifespan just a little bit more, because right now the poor guy is on life support.
Minnesota, the Minnetonka serpent turtle.
In 1892, a few newspapers around the country printed articles saying that a horrible monster had been spotted in Lake Minnetonka in Minnesota. And I think for this one, rather than describe the monster, I'm just going to show you the picture of it that the newspapers ran with the story. So there you go. You are not going to catch me in Lake Minnetonka anytime soon.
Mississippi, the Ship Island sea serpent.
Lying just a few miles off the coast of Mississippi is Ship Island, the site of two extremely detailed encounters with a sea serpent from back in July of 1908. In the first, a ship was sitting in completely calm waters near the island when all of a sudden their small boat began to rock back and forth, seemingly all by itself. The ship's crew ran out on deck to see what had caused the disturbance, and there, 40 yards from the boat, was a massive sea serpent over 100 feet in length. The snake was using its tail like a propeller, whipping it through the water and circling the boat for 20 minutes straight. And strangely, the crew detected an air of curiosity around the serpent. It didn't seem to be threatening them at all. It almost seemed like it was just watching them as they were watching it. So naturally, the men concluded that this must be a young sea serpent that had simply lost its way. Eventually, though, the ship's cook came out on deck with a bunch of coffee cups, and when he saw the monster, he was so shocked that he dropped the cups right onto the deck, and the noise of the smashing cups scared the monster, and off it went, speeding out of sight. And then, a couple days later, the local papers printed another encounter with the sea serpent. This time, a small party of men were fishing off the coast of Ship Island when, once again, the great beast appeared, this time swimming directly at the fisherman's boat. The men decided to try and capture the monster, so they climbed into a smaller skiff and they started rowing in the direction of the serpent. And as they got closer, the oarmen tried to pull up alongside the monster, but they miscalculated and accidentally just crashed right into it. The serpent recoiled, seemingly in pain, and one of the fishermen took the opportunity to drive a harpoon deep into its side. So, of course, the sea serpent took off and it dashed away for open sea, towing the small boat behind it. And strangely, as the serpent pulled the boat along, the men on board noticed a large collection of sea animals trying to take bites out of the monster. Large sharks and turtles were nipping at the serpent as it tried to escape the boat. The men quickly realized that they were in trouble, so they reached out and they cut the harpoon line before the serpent could pull them underwater, and that was that. As far as I'm aware, at least, the monster was never seen again.
Missouri, Cat-Eyed Jack.
Over 20 different people in Mexico, Missouri claim to see a 10-foot-tall man dressed in all black with the glittering eyes of a cat back in December of 1883. Cat-Eyed Jack, as I've decided to call him, would strut around town at night with his head bowed in an abstracted way, whatever that means, and he would glare at the locals with his tiny animalistic eyes. And sometimes he'd peer into the buggies of passing travelers, and sometimes he'd be sitting upright on a fence with his head bowed as if meditating. And one man even watched him wade through knee-deep mud before he disappeared into the nearby woods. Search parties were sent out trying to hunt down the specter, and some people theorized that maybe Jack was an escaped asylum patient, but eventually the sightings just dried up with no real resolution. Isn't it kind of crazy how many stories there are of 10-foot-tall figures in black scaring people at night in small towns? Like, why are there so many cryptids of this particular genre?
Montana, the Centerville Ghost.
And speaking of, the Centerville Ghost from Butte, Montana is another cryptid that is basically just a figure in black walking around at night scaring people. Except this time with a little extra flair. The very first time that this ghost was encountered was in March of 1901 when a couple of men were walking home from a concert late at night, and as they walked through the streets, they witnessed a figure dressed in black turn out from an alleyway and start walking down the town's streetcar tracks. And at first, the men paid no attention to the figure. They just assumed that it was some woman walking through the streets just as they were. But then the figure stopped at the top of a hill and it waited. And as the men approached, the figure stepped in front of them and it threw back its black veil and it revealed a horribly disfigured face illuminated by blue streaks of sulfur running across its skin. Before the men could react, the figure let loose an ear-splitting screech, turned, and hustled away into the night. 3 days later, another story hit the local papers. This time, a miner was walking home around 11 p.m. when a mysterious figure dressed in black stepped out directly into his path. The miner moved to the left and to the right, trying to walk around the specter, but each time it refused to let him by. At first, the miner wanted to run, but strangely, he found himself glued in place, unable to move, forced to watch as the shrouded figure opened its hand to reveal a horrible grinning skull in its palm. Then with the other hand, the figure threw back its veil, and there again was that mangled, disgusting face, haloed with unearthly blue light. With another shriek, the monster disappeared into the night, leaving the poor miner absolutely terrified. And from there, the ghost was off to the races. Many, many more sightings were reported. People were fainting in the street and falling down, trying to run away from the ghost with its horrible blue phosphorescent face. And eventually, as usual, ghost hunting parties were assembled to try and flush out the phantom, but even then, the monster couldn't be stopped. On March 10th, a group of 10 or 12 young men marched into the streets of Butte looking to capture the ghost, only to wind up running for their lives because the ghost appeared at the top of a hill and came shrieking down at them, which scattered the vigilante group out into the streets. 2 of the boys, though, actually had enough courage to try and follow the ghost. And this is where things get really weird. The 2 young men tailed the phantom all the way to a dilapidated cabin on the edge of town, but then when they went inside, the ghost ambushed them and punched them in the head, I guess, and knocked them out cold. Later, after waking up, the boys recounted the 2 blue burning balls of fire that the ghost had in place of eyes. Before long, word began to spread that a punch from the ghost's phosphorescent fist felt like a kick from a mule or a hook from a champion boxer. And if that's not enough, other people also reported getting clubbed in the head by the ghost, and a couple of guys said that they shot the phantom point blank in the chest with shotguns to no effect. And one time, the ghost supposedly kidnapped a lady and then tied her to a post and sat down next to the woman and smoked a cigarette with her. And then it untied her and let her go. Oh, and once the ghost was chasing a woman with a baby through the street at night, and the woman tripped and fell down, and the ghost actually stopped and helped the woman up and then picked up the baby and gave it to the woman. So I guess the specter had a good side. He's fine punching people in the head and kidnapping ladies, but he's not gonna hurt a baby. But even with all that excitement, surprisingly, this legend too eventually faded away. People began to talk about the ghost less and less, and as this paper put it, there is no more effectual way to lay the ghost than to stop making a sensation over it. And so over time, the ghost sightings just dried up. People still had theories about where the ghost came from. Like apparently one guy claimed that he was the ghost in a local saloon, and some people blamed the ghost on a local homeless morphine addict named Fighting Steve, who lived in a gulch just outside of town. Maybe I should do a video on Fighting Steve one day. But ultimately, the mystery went unsolved, and today the story of the Centerville ghost is virtually unknown, which is a shame because this one really, really deserves more attention. Like genuinely, I left out so much of this story. This entry could have been like 25 minutes long, easy.
Nebraska, the Hay Springs Mermaid.
All right, that last one was pretty hefty. So how about we keep things simple for Nebraska? In September of 1921, there was a mermaid discovered in a small pond near Hay Springs, Nebraska, which caused great excitement among the vicinity's female population. Many of the wives of this community have forbidden their husbands to hunt ducks on this lake.
Nevada, the Nevada Nightmare.
You know, thus far, we have mostly stayed away from a very common genre of cryptid, and that is the dead cryptid. This is when somebody finds the body of some horrible looking thing, and then they run into town going, "Holy cow, look at this crazy monster corpse I just found." Nevada provides a fantastic example. In July of 1906, a couple of guys came into Carson, Nevada, saying that they had found the corpse of some kind of monster up on nearby Mount Davidson. The monster looked like a combination of a Chinese devil and a nightmare. It had a head like a human being with nose, mouth, and eyes, but no body, and the monster also had a perpetually grinning mouth full of 60 teeth, and it had legs like a frog and wings like a bat. I don't know about you guys, but that description sounds to me like a human head with bat wings and frog legs that was grinning super wide. I don't know what else they could possibly be describing there. That's the Nevada Nightmare.
New Hampshire, the Warren Warlock.
Okay, I am stretching the definition of cryptid very thin with this entry. Like, I might call this more of a legend or a folk tale, but bear with me anyway, because I think it's worth it. The History of Warren, New Hampshire, written back in 1870, tells the tale of a man named Simeon Smith who lived in Warren back in the late 18th century. And all of Simeon's neighbors thought that he was adept at the black art, some kind of warlock or wizard who had kissed Satan's cloven hoof in exchange for superhuman powers. According to legend, Simeon would bewitch local children, and he'd terrorize the town's cats, and he would shrink down to the size of a bug and sneak into people's houses, and he would ride moonbeams around at night, zipping all over the mountains. But worst of all, his most evil habit was saddling up one of the neighbors and riding them around town like a horse. Just imagine looking out your window and seeing your doctor give some wizard a pony ride. That is pretty dang evil.
New Jersey, the Zigzag Ghost.
All right, here's a fun one. In January of 1900, many residents of Moorestown, New Jersey, reported seeing a ghostly white apparition on the city streets at night. Those who saw the ghost said it moved down the sidewalk in a zigzag pattern, and then when it got close to somebody, it would disappear out of sight. Eventually, legends of this phantom grew large enough that the local police had to intervene, and what they learned was that the ghost was actually a shoemaker who was trying to learn how to ride a bike. Yeah, apparently the shoemaker didn't want anyone to see him fall down, so he would only practice at night while wearing a white sweater, and whenever he saw anybody else on the city streets, he would get super embarrassed and he'd hide behind a tree. So the zigzag pattern that witnesses reported was the shoemaker wobbling down the street on his bike, and then when he saw somebody, he would hide, thus creating the illusion that he had disappeared into thin air. If I'm being honest, I kind of don't believe that any of that actually happened, but it's funny, so I'm putting it in the video.
New Mexico, the Blank-Faced Monster.
In October of 1966, a family in the South Valley portion of Albuquerque, New Mexico, reported to the police that a strange monster had been stalking around their home for weeks. The family described the beast as a 5-foot-tall, hairy humanoid with a completely blank, white, featureless face. The monster would creep around through their backyard at night, leaving footprints in the yard, scaring the family's children, shutting off the radio with its mere presence, and, most strangely, crying like a human baby as it circled the home. Once, the family's eldest son ventured out into the yard to confront the monster, but it ambushed him and struck him in the chest and knocked him out cold. And from that point on, whenever the teenager heard the sobs and wails of the blank-faced monster, his chest would start to hurt all over again, as if the cries reawakened the pain. And although at first the monster sightings were localized to this one house, soon they began to spread, and before long, police were fielding dozens of calls and a plethora of sightings from all across South Valley. As spooky as all that is, though, this is actually another cryptid where we seem to have a definite explanation. Just a few days after the initial monster sightings were reported, police actually spotted the beast prowling around on the side of a house, so they chased him into a barn, and inside that barn, they found a hastily discarded monster costume. Apparently, the man who was inside that costume had ran from the cops into the barn, ripped off his outfit, and disappeared out the back door. The costume consisted of a black wig, a white face mask made entirely out of a mattress cover, and 2 elk hooves that apparently had been used to create the monster's footprints. The police claimed to have a suspect for the hoax in mind, but I couldn't find any follow-up stories, so I guess we're gonna have to leave this one here.
New York, the Staten Island Pants Burglar.
Okay, here is the MO of the Staten Island Pants Burglar. Back in 1930, he would sneak into Staten Island homes in the dead of night, and he'd raid the fridge and eat a bunch of food, and then he'd dig through the pockets of any pants that he found, looking for cash and valuables. Reportedly, the burglar stole over $10,000 using this method, and very occasionally, He'd even steal the pants themselves. The police were after this guy for months, reportedly even using dogs to try and track him down, but as far as I can tell, the pants burglar was never caught. Now you might be thinking, why am I bringing up a non-supernatural robbery story in a video about cryptids? Well, I actually found exactly one article out of dozens where the newspaper said that some people thought that the pants burglar might be a spirit monster. So therefore, he counts.
North Carolina, the literal devil.
In June of 1879, a fishing captain shot and killed a bizarre sea monster off the coast of North Carolina. The beast was 7 feet long and about 600 pounds in weight, and for the most part, it just kind of looked like a really big turtle. It had a black shell and fins and flippers, and if you want, you can pause and read that whole paragraph for yourself. But basically, what the paper is describing here is a giant turtle. The captain who killed the monster, though, had another theory. He disagreed. He thought that he had, in fact, shot and killed Satan himself, the literal devil. His satanic majesty had apparently been snuffed out with one rifle shot to the neck. I just love to imagine this guy pulling his boat back into the harbor that day, and somebody's like, "Hey, Bill, how was the fishing?" And he's like, "Oh, not bad. I got a couple tuna and some sailfish, and oh yeah, I killed Satan."
North Dakota, the Airwood Lake Monster.
In September of 1903, a couple of boys were fishing at Airwood Lake in North Dakota when all of a sudden, they heard a roaring and a hissing and a terrific splashing of water. A 15-foot-long monster was rising out of the lake not 100 feet away from them. It had 4 legs and 2 arms and a head like an alligator with long curved tusks, and it had dirty yellow scales running down its body. Of course, the boys were terrified, so they ran and the monster followed, emitting blood-curdling screams as it chased the boys for about a half a mile before finally giving up and returning to the lake. The boys had got away. And it's a good thing too, because that monster had cruel-looking claws that looked as though they were sharpened up for business.
Ohio, the Flying Tusk Man.
As much as I love the cryptid stories that go on for weeks and have dozens of supposed sightings, I also have a special soft spot in my heart for the monsters that just showed up one time in a brief article in one newspaper and then disappeared forever. Just a little tiny blip in the cryptid timeline, just a little minuscule thread in the big wide tapestry of human myth and legend. Case in point, the Flying Tusk Man from Hamilton, Ohio back in June of 1892. According to witnesses, this was a 5-foot-tall monster with large white wings, a human face, and great white tusks that would glisten in the moonlight. It would rise out of the ground like a ghost and then fly at horrified pedestrians before disappearing back into the black of the night. You will not find any other references to this monster on the internet besides this video. You will not find any other newspaper articles about it. It is entirely possible that you and I are the first people to even think about this monster in literally decades. And I think that's pretty cool.
Oklahoma, the Abominable Chicken Man.
All right, get ready for the letdown of the century. This is the story of Oklahoma's Abominable Chicken Man. In December of 1970, a farmer in El Reno, Oklahoma, went out to his chicken coop and he found that the door of the coop had been ripped off the hinges and thrown on the ground. And on the door and inside the coop were a bunch of strange handprints that local zoologists agreed were probably made by a primate. And that is the entire story. I am not kidding. That is the one encounter with the abominable chicken man that was ever printed. Nobody ever actually saw the monster. Nobody ever found similar handprints anywhere else. Truly, this is just an incredibly vague, like, Bigfoot story in disguise as something else. Like, how on earth can you call a monster Abominable Chicken Man and it's just a handprint? Like, I was expecting some giant mutated chicken creature or any creature at all. I am pissed at this 56-year-old newspaper article. What a ripoff.
Oregon, Medford Schmooze.
Back in 1984, the Center for UFO Studies newsletter printed a story that they had received in the mail. In this story, a woman recalls driving home in 1953 through some wooded foothills near Medford, Oregon, along with her husband and 12-year-old daughter. As the trio drove through the forest, they suddenly noticed 3 creatures on the side of the road. So they stopped the car and watched as the creatures seemed to glide across the road and disappear into the woods on the other side. This all happened less than 10 feet from the car, so the woman got a good look at the strange beings. They were 4 feet tall and covered with very smooth white fur. They closely resembled geese in the shape of their body, but they had no beaks and no wings and no arms or legs or any obvious facial features. And in fact, they really looked a whole lot like the Schmooze from the comic strip Lil Abner, which, if you don't know, the Schmooze looked like that. And if that isn't enough of a visual aid, the woman also drew a little picture. And here is that picture. Incredible.
Pennsylvania, the Phantom Newfie.
One night in July of 1908, 3 Philadelphia police officers were patrolling the city when they noticed a big black figure walking along behind them. The cops went down a ravine and across a bridge before realizing that the dark shape on their tail was just a large Newfoundland dog. So the police stopped, and the dog stopped, and then the dog said, "Good morning," and the police were shocked, and the dog again said, "Good morning," and then it evaporated in a wisp of green vapor. Dozens of cops soon hit the streets looking to hunt down the phantom dog, but as far as I can tell, they never found that ghostly Newfie again.
Rhode Island, the Watchog Monster.
In July of 1956, a bunch of kids at a summer camp in Charlestown, Rhode Island, reported seeing the Watchog Monster, which they described as a 25-pound white cat with a gray streak around its head. And the kids shot at it with arrows, and they hunted it with rifles and knives. And I just hope that that poor house cat made it out of that camp in one piece, because that is clearly what this monster was.
South Carolina, the Palmetto Creek Monster.
So one thing that I've learned while doing research for this project is that pretty much every single state has Bigfoot stories. Even way before the term Bigfoot was even commonplace, you can find accounts from all across the country of people running into 7-foot-tall men covered with hair. But in addition to those run-of-the-mill Sasquatch tales, most states also have what I would call advanced Bigfoot cases. These are accounts where the monster is very similar to Bigfoot, just with a couple of twists. The Palmetto Creek Monster in South Carolina is a fantastic example. In July of 1892, many people near Palmetto Creek reported seeing a large, hairy figure that looked like a gigantic ape. So pretty much just Bigfoot, right? Except this monster also had flippers and a scaly back like an alligator. So there you go. In my opinion, those small changes separate this beast just enough from regular old Bigfoot for it to be a legally distinct monster. This is a separate South Carolina specific cryptid. It's not Sasquatch, it's the Palmetto Creek Monster.
South Dakota, the Big Muddy Monster.
Big Muddy is the nickname of the Missouri River, which at one point flows through the town of Vermilion in eastern South Dakota. And in that town, in July of 1872, a 30-foot-long aquatic monster was frequently spotted in the waters of the Missouri. And according to the single newspaper article that reported on this story, the monster sightings are real and well credited because not only has the beast been seen by many gentlemen and one lady of Vermilion, but also the editor of the newspaper saw the monster, which is nuff said.
Tennessee, New Providence Pond Monster.
This one comes to us from New Providence, Tennessee, back in July of 1871. At 9 in the morning one day, a tobacco store owner heard some weird noises coming from the pond behind his building, so he went out to investigate and found a 32-foot-long snake with a body 6 feet around in circumference. The beast was whipping its tail into the water and literally knocking the bottom out of the pond, according to the store owner. So the shopkeeper ran and raised the alarm in town, and before long, there was a regiment of citizens drawn up in line of battle, wielding guns, sticks, fence rails, ice hooks, rocks, and anything else that they could use to attack the beast. The crowd lined the pond and attacked. A brisk firing commenced and was kept up for some time. So the whole town is surrounding this tiny pond and just shooting into it and throwing pitchforks in there and slamming fence posts into the water. And all the while, the monster is supposedly thrashing around, desperately trying to avoid the showering missiles of various kinds. Eventually, though, the townsfolk made a mistake. They tried to attack the monster by rolling a bunch of barrels into the pond, but the snake simply used the barrels as a platform to escape the water, and off it went, slithering up the barrels and escaping into the city streets. The townsfolk, though, were not going to allow the snake to get away that easy. They jumped on their horses and they ran the monster down until finally it seemed like the beast had ran out of strength. The poor monster lay on the ground, utterly defeated, unable to move, as a crowd of people began to form a circle around it. "Should we capture it alive?" ventured a few voices. "Nah, too dangerous," replied the crowd consensus. So they shot the monster 17 times and they killed it right then and there. Then they cut open its stomach and found 2 calves, 9 baby hogs, 79 frogs, and about 150 fish. Of course, the town also had to do something with the giant snake carcass that they had on their hands, so they stuffed the skin with 42 barrels worth of sawdust, and they put it on display at that original storekeeper's tobacco store with the intent of eventually sending the snake to the Smithsonian. And that is the end of the article, and as far as I'm aware, the last time that the New Providence Pond Monster was ever mentioned, ever. But I wonder if it's in that Smithsonian warehouse somewhere deep behind boxes and boxes and boxes.
Texas, the Italy bird.
In December of 1890, a gigantic bird was sighted flying high above the town of Italy, Texas. At first, the bird just circled the town, going round and round, until all of a sudden, it shot down out of the sky, grabbed a 4-year-old boy, and flew way back up in the air. Luckily, the child's father saw the whole thing, so he grabbed his rifle, jumped on a horse, and started out after the bird. After about a mile of flying, the monster grew tired of carrying the boy, so it slowly descended down back to earth and perched on the edge of a large ravine. The father, noticing that his son was now safely back on the ground, crept up behind the bird and shot it in the head, ending the crisis right then and there. After careful examination of the body, the bird was described as a 100-pound crane covered with a thin coat of hair. You know, sometimes I gotta admit, it's tough to find the motivation to make YouTube videos. Like, I just get in my own head and I wonder why I'm even bothering to put so much time and energy into these projects, and I ask myself if any of this is even worth it. Truly, is there any meaning to what I'm doing here at all? Is this worth it in any way? Well, it's times like this when I realize that maybe my work does matter. Because maybe there's a parent out there watching this video, a parent of a small child who lives in Italy, Texas, and maybe that parent has never before considered the danger of a giant bird carrying away their child. And maybe now that parent is going to make sure to always keep a horse at the ready and a gun within reach. And maybe this is actually the year that the Italy bird finally makes its horrible return. And maybe I just saved a life by making this video. And maybe
Utah, the horse.
Okay, so I am absolutely cheating with this one, but I just don't know when I'm gonna get the opportunity to share this article again, so I better take the chance while I got it right now. About a half a year ago, I received an email from somebody named Bonnie. And Bonnie told me that her and her brother had been looking through some old newspapers from the early 1940s that they found in their grandparents' house, and they found one article that they thought I might appreciate. So let's start off with the caption on this one. The Thing. This weird-looking critter arrived at the Salt Lake City Union Stockyards with a shipment of horses from Longmont, Colorado. It has the hind legs of a steer, the hairy coat of a yak, and the beard of a goat. After much thought, it was finally classified as a horse. There's the picture. So there you go, Utah. Your official Dime Store Adventures obscure cryptid is the Salt Lake City horse.
Vermont, the Wrightsville Thing.
Another genre of old cryptid that we haven't discussed yet is the incredibly vague cryptid. These were extremely common in local newspapers up until about 50 years or so ago. And rather than explain it to you, I think I'll just give you an example from Wrightsville, Vermont back in 1938. Strange object seen. A man or animal is prowling around Wrightsville at night. For weeks, residents have seen the object, but nobody can describe it. Police have been looking for the person or animal and have found nothing so far. And that's it. In 1938, in Wrightsville, Vermont, there was something. And that's all we know. I want to see some cryptid fan art of this one.
Virginia, Elmer.
Please allow me to introduce you to Elmer. In 1935, a woman living in Richmond, Virginia claimed that Elmer was living under her floorboards and haunting her house. Sometimes she would open her door and see Elmer in her backyard, and sometimes Elmer would disappear and reappear right in front of her eyes, and sometimes Elmer would just lay underneath her house and hammer away on the floor all night long, just beating away on the boards. As soon as the local papers started reporting on Elmer, the story gained a ton of traction, and before long, literally thousands of people were showing up at the woman's house, tearing up her kitchen, and literally trying to rip up the floorboards to expose the monster. Eventually, though, a photographer had the bright idea to just climb under the house and take a photo, and click, there's Elmer, or Mrs. Elmer, I should say, a mother possum with 5 kids. After it was discovered that the monster was just a regular old possum, a few local boys scared the animals out from underneath the house and caught them by the tails and took them home as pets, making this a rare scenario where a cryptid ended up domesticated.
Washington, the Washington Flyers.
In 1948, there were 2 separate reports of flying men in western Washington. The first occurrence was in January in Chehalis, Washington. Reportedly, an older woman and some school children saw a man with wings fly 200 feet over their heads. The man was flying in an upright position as if he was standing in the air, and he had no visible form of propulsion, although the woman reported that she heard a sizzling and whizzing noise as the man flew above her barn and out of sight. A few months later, in April, a couple of laundry employees in Longview, Washington, reported a very similar encounter. The 2 employees were outside of their shop one day when all of a sudden, 3 upright men with wings went flying through the sky about 250 feet in the air. The employees said that the men were wearing helmets this time, and they also had something on their sides that might have been guns. But otherwise, they described pretty much the exact same thing as the woman in Chehalis. This is a pretty unique one. There's not a lot of flying man stories out there, especially upright flying men.
West Virginia, the Bunner's Ridge Beast.
In August of 1961, the promoters of a rural fair started spreading a story about a monster stalking around the Brunner's Ridge area of West Virginia. How exactly spreading a fake monster story was supposed to promote the fair, nobody seemed to know. But despite the fact that this was, from the beginning, a pretty obvious hoax, some people still believed it. And one person who really believed it was 17-year-old Junior Dale Wagner, who was walking home one day when he saw something brown and pretty big running down a hill at him. Junior had heard about the monster story, so he got real scared and he took off running, desperately looking for some place to hide. And the first place that he found was a barber shop, so he dove headfirst through the window of the shop and knocked himself out cold. His injuries were so severe that he had to be hospitalized. It is kind of crazy that even though this cryptid is pretty much a confirmed hoax, maybe more than any other cryptid in the video, somehow it also generated the most severe injury that we've come across.
Wisconsin, the Appleton Mud Monster.
In August of 1963, a few boys wanted to scare their friend as he walked his girlfriend home, so they had one boy climb on the shoulders of another boy, and then they threw a blanket over top of the 2 boys and had their new monster stand on a hill near the local sewage plant. And then as the unsuspecting friend walked by the hill, the 2 boys started hurling down clumps of mud. Pretty spooky prank, right? Well, fast forward a couple of days, and now the newspapers are reporting on the Appleton Mud Monster, and hundreds of people are swarming the sewage plant with clubs, and local kids are inventing songs to sing about the monster, and police are desperately trying to keep people away from the sewage plant, but the crowds keep smashing down the barricades to get in there and look for the monster, and you just never ever hear about something like this anymore.
Wyoming, the King of Snakes.
Okay, so at its core, this one is just another giant snake story. But there is a very small little extra detail here that just gets me for some reason. In 1895, a giant 14-foot-long snake was frequently spotted around Newcastle, Wyoming, which sounds a whole lot like all the other giant snake stories that we've already covered. But this snake actually had a crest on the top of its head that was shaped like a crown. which led the people of Newcastle to refer to this monster as the King of Snakes. I don't know why, but that little twist just tickles me. He's got a crown, he's the King of Snakes. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. That's all I got, and I'll see you next time.